Welcome to the Wellesley Needlepoint Collection's Learning Center. Today what we'd like to teach you is how to do the basket weave stitch. In the last lesson we talked about what a stitch was. It's looking at all of these little X's that are made up when you weave a canvas. And let me zoom this in so you can see more easily. Keep the camera still. So when you do the basic one needlepoint stitch, which most needlepoint, the basic stitches are made up of these, you come up through the hole to the lower left and you go down to the hole in the upper right. So that is one stitch. The difference between tent stitch, continental stitch, and basket weave is the order in which you put a number of these stitches together. So we talked about this in the first lesson, that when you do the continental stitch, you would do these stitches in horizontal rows. So your next stitch would be this one, and then you would work in rows like we did in the last lesson. When you're doing the basket weave stitch, instead of having those rows be horizontal, we are actually going to be doing diagonal rows. So the next stitch would actually be, or our next row would actually be this stitch and this stitch, making up a diagonal row on the work that we're doing. So I'm going to start below it, do one stitch there, and then next to it. That gets you started with your diagonal row. Another way to look at a diagonal row is put down a needle or a piece of paper and you can see these stitches. Here's your next row. Again, it's a diagonal row. This stitch, and this stitch. Once you get a few stitches in doing basket weave, it's easy to see where the next row goes because they kind of tuck up into the row above them. When you're doing the basket weave stitch, you typically want to start in the upper right corner and work on your project that is painted and work your way down. So there's your third row of basket weave. Now, why do people do basket weave versus the continental stitch? When you do basket weave, it doesn't distort your canvas. So have you ever done a needlepoint project and when you're done, the whole shape of the canvas has changed and the project is at an angle? It's not a problem if you have a project like that. You just need to have it blocked before it's finished. So blocking is the process of straightening that canvas out. If you use the basket weave stitch, you are less likely to warp your canvas as you work with it. You're also less likely to have faint shadows of the rows of work of your basket weave. So your look will be smoother. Okay, so here is my next row, and you can see that as I work my way through basket weave, I can sort of see that the next row is going to tuck up into the row above it. Again, we're doing a diagonal row. I'm going to start right here. And then this one kind of tucks up to the row above it. So your stitches sort of reveal themselves to you as you work in diagonals. Now you will hear people talk about the basket weave stitch of going down the poles and up the steps. We're going to cover that, but what I'd like you to do first, if you're new to basket weaving, is just get accustomed to working in diagonal rows. And then once you're comfortable with the concept of working in diagonals rather than horizontal or vertical rows, come back, finish the rest of the video, and learn about what we mean when we're talking about the canvas, how to read a canvas and how to tell whether you're working on the canvas, the order in which you do these rows. We'll do that next. Once you master doing these diagonal rows, you'll want to learn how to do the basket weave in the correct order, meaning whether you're going to do the rows going down steps, going up steps and down poles or not. And I'll explain steps and poles in a second. That's just a term that we like to use. There are many, many ways to teach basket weave, so do what works best for you. I'm going to share the one that I've found the most success with. In order to know how to do that, you first need to learn how to read a canvas. So to read a canvas, you need to look at each and every one of these intersections that you're stitching over. So a canvas is made up of threads that are woven. And when you weave something, there's a thread on top and a thread on the bottom in each of these intersections. So let's start with this one right here. It's pretty obvious. It's every time I do a stitch, I go from here to there, lower left to the upper right to cross over that X. If I'm going to read that actual stitch, I'm going to look at which thread is on the top of that weave. So in this case, the thread that's on top on that woven intersection is a vertical thread. So that stitch right there, I would call a pole, because the thread that's on top is going up and down like I was going to slide down a fire pole. You'll see that reference in a minute again. The one right next to it, because it's woven, is going to be a step, because the thread that is on the top is a horizontal thread, like the tread of a step. So to learn how to read a canvas, you just simply look at the canvas and look at the stitches, or the intersections of each of the little X's, and figure out which thread is on top. If the thread that is on top runs north-south or vertical, it's what we call a pole. If the thread that is on top is horizontal or runs east-west or across, that is a step. So my question, then we take that one step further once you get comfortable with that idea. And if you look at our next row in stitching, we would stitch this stitch, this stitch, this stitch, here and here. And if you read that canvas and if you look at it carefully, you can see that in every one of those cases, because this is a diagonal row, they're all going to be the exact kind of stitch. In this case, they are a pole. So every one of those stitches that's going to make up my next row has the thread on top running vertical. So when I'm stitching that row, I should be going, I'd like to think of it as going downhill, like this. So I'm going to start right here. And because it's a pole stitch and the way my canvas is, I'm headed downhill, which kind of makes sense because if you slide down a pole, you would go downhill. That's why people use the pole and step analogy. This is a difficult concept. It does take a little bit of getting used to, and I stitched for years, never knowing that the reason that I had, so for example, in the background of a belt, I had done the whole background in Basketweave, and yet I saw these faint angled stitches going through and I thought maybe I was just changing my tension. Actually, I wasn't. I was doing it the wrong way. So now if you look at the next row, this stitch, you can see right here, the top thread is a horizontal thread running east-west. So that's the way that a tread on a step would be, so that is a step. So I should be going uphill like I was going up some steps. And you will see that every single stitch, if it's a true diagonal, every single stitch will have the same nature. So the nice thing about that is, once you get yourself going the right direction, everything you do going forward should stay the same way. Once you get yourself started, you don't have to keep reading it time and time and time again. Oops. Dropped my needle. It will automatically be that the next row I would go down on, I would end up going downhill, and it would be a pole. just like that. So once you get your initial very beginning correct, and you could also go into your local needlepoint shop and they can probably tell you whether you've gotten started correctly, then everything else after that should be. Now the only trick to that is then if it's time to switch a thread to a new thread, don't stop on the end, because then you have to read it again to figure out where you're supposed to go. Stop in the middle so that then you know, oh, okay, I've got to pick up right here, and then you just keep following your pattern. Hopefully that will help you. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit about how to do your basket weave correctly, and I'm certain that your local needlepoint shop can help you as well if you have any questions about it, but this should get you started. Have fun.